Hello and welcome to Beyond OT Australia podcast. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Ricky.
And today we will be your host. This podcast is a space where we explore important conversations, share knowledge, and highlight stories that inspire and support our community in occupational therapy and beyond. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Melissa.
Woohoo!
Melissa is a speech pathologist specializing in voice and communication. So, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. Mel, tell us a little more about you. So, how did you decide to pursue a career in speech pathologist?
Thank you so much for having me today. I've been very interested in helping people. I've been very interested in voice, and I've been very interested in language development as well. So my background is in psychology. That was my first degree. Did a bit of play therapy, and then I also taught English as a second language. Throughout that whole time, I was very interested in speech pathology, but the opportunity for me to study that only came up about 10 years later after that initial interest. And that brought me to Australia. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, today, what is your main area of focus within speech therapy?
So at the moment, my main focus is twofold. So I do lots of pediatric work, and that is all-encompassing, whoever walks through that door. And I also specialize in voice as well. So that's my personal area of interest that I'm currently developing a lot in as well. Yeah.
So, what were the biggest challenges you faced at the beginning of your career?
Wow, that brings me right back to the start. I remember that first session in speech pathology. But I think over the years, definitely there were sessions that were just really fulfilling. Like those really stand out in my mind. I remember a time where a child looked at me and said, "How did you get this job?" And they said, I really want to know how to help people. So I just thought that was so touching, and that just gave me a little reminder that everything we do, everything that we do with the children, like that's really important, and it actually makes a difference in their lives. Some other, areas or like say challenges that I've faced, I think they are challenges are often thrown at us to give us insight into the areas that we, need to develop in, and areas that we need to increase our capacity in. So one of the examples was, I remember my first ever session coming out of speech pathology as a graduate, and I had prepared like 6 activities for this child, and they were all arranged nicely in the room. And I had an hour for the session. The child came in, cycled through 6 activities in 5 minutes. And I was left standing there going, whoa, what just happened? And what am I going to do? And I didn't know what to do, and, helping with regulation and things like that. So those were all things that I had to learn very early on, because it's that regulation and that therapeutic relationship that actually helps the child more than just the activities that you've planned. So definitely those were some of the areas. Yeah.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Cool. All right. Now, Melissa, what do you think people still misunderstand about speech pathology?
One comment that I get a lot when I tell someone that I'm a speech pathologist, they say, can you help me talk better? So I think a common misconception is that people think that the final goal of speech pathology is always to talk. But speech pathology is way, way more than that. A big component of it is helping people to communicate better, whether they are talking or not talking. There are also many sort of subspecialties and areas in speech pathology that we look at. So we look at voice, we look at swallowing, we look at speech and language, which are 2 different areas. We look at stuttering. We also look at feeding. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Now, talking about speech and language delay, let's start from the beginning. What is considered speech and language delay?
So when you look at speech and language delay, you're looking at two different areas here. You're looking at speech, you're looking at language. And when you think about a delay, typically it would be children who are developing typically, but they are sort of achieving milestones a little bit later than their peers. When we look at speech development, we are looking at the act of producing speech. So using your voice, using your articulators, and making sounds. When you look at language, you are looking more at is areas called receptive language, which is the understanding, and then also the expressive language, which is being able to have language content. So, for example, vocabulary, knowing how to structure your sentences and use your sentence in a way that is effectively able to communicate to others.
I mean, that's amazing, Melissa. What you've just explained. I think a lot of parents do get confused between the definitions of in both areas, but that's really good information that I think parents out there would love to hear and understand this as well. My next question would be: what are the warning signs that parents and educators, basically should look out for?
I think one of the big warning signs would be when a child is not responding, when they're not responding to their name, when they're not really showing any interest in social interaction, maybe when if they're not babbling very much, or if they're not copying, sometimes if they're not using gestures as well, and they're just sort of just not really interested in the whatever's going on around them. I think those are things that you typically look out for, like in the early developmental years.
Oh, great. Awesome.
So, is there a certain age when parents should seek help?
I think this one is very much a trust your gut kind of question. For parents, they know their children the best, and they will know if something is up. So I would say generally around 18 months, that's usually when things start to show a little bit more, and even before that. So those points that I shared before about the responding and looking and just taking an interest in the world around them, I think those are things to look out for. And there are lots of norms that you can get. Usually recommend to look up in Speech Pathology Australia, or maybe in some of the children's hospital websites. They typically would give you some lists that tell you sort of norms. So norms are the most typical, like say, if you're 18-month-old, maybe understanding about 50 words and being able to say about 6 to 20 words. Now, that's just a general norm, right? So not every child's going to be right there, but, you can use that as a marker to see whether your child is developing at an expected rate.
Amazing. Great. What factors can affect the development of speech and language in a child?
I would say lots of factors. But I think the primary ones, considering, if health and if, nutrition and all these basic needs are all in place, and then definitely social environment, and whether or not the child's in a language-rich environment. So if the child is in an environment that has a lot of stimulation, there's lots of songs, there's lots of conversation, the child feels safe, I think these are all really key factors to helping language development.
To reassure families who may be feeling nervous, what does an assessment for a possible delay look like? Is it painful?
So when we talk about assessment, in this context, I think we would be talking about assessment for early language. That would usually mean that the child who's coming in, maybe to 3 years old. Typically, what would happen is the clinic would first give the parent a form to fill in, just to give a little bit of background information, and give the speech pathologist a little bit of a heads up on what to expect. Then, when the parent comes in with the child, the speech pathologist typically does a parent interview to just find out a bit more about their medical background, about their history, and to understand more in depth the issue that they're facing at the moment. And then after that, the therapist gets on the floor, has a play with the child, has some fun, and then from there, it would probably look a lot like parent education sessions. So the speech pathologist will come up with strategies, have a discussion with the parent on how these strategies can be carried out in daily life. And it goes on like that. And of course, a big focus is often on parent education.
Well, I think my next question would be, I think, something that a lot of parents out there would want to know. How does speech therapy support a child in their everyday life?
So, speech pathology in speech and language specifically, I think a key thing is that it helps to bridge the gap of communication. So, if a child is finding it really hard, or they're getting frustrated with not being able to convey their intended message, then speech pathology will help the child by giving them the vocabulary and building up their functional language to be able to communicate their everyday wants and needs. And apart from just that expressive language, if that's really tricky, or the child's finding it really difficult to talk, there are also assistive ways that we can do that. We can use AAC, we can use picture cards, or like pointing and gestures, or even sign language. That can be just as effective way of communicating as using speech.
That's great. Yeah. Quick break. If you're enjoying this episode, we've created a free ebook just for you called Play with Purpose. Inside, you'll find simple game ideas to help support fine motor skills, emotional regulation, and sensory play at home. You can download it now in the link in the description below. Now, let's get back to our episode. So I think the next couple of questions we're going to be asking you are basically from our viewers and the families who've actually dropped us a couple of questions. I think the first question would be from someone who was asking that she's got a child who is 2 years old and is only saying a few words. Now, is that normal?
That's a very interesting question to ask, if it's normal. Like, I think there are other questions that we can be asking. Instead of just looking at the physical act of saying a few words, I think we need to look at a wider array of things. We want to look at the nonverbal language. We want to look at what we call pre-linguistic skills. So is this child able to follow your eye gaze? Like, are they tracking when there's movement happening? Is this child interested in what you're doing, in noises around them? Yeah, I think these would be things that we would look at before we just zoom into whether they're talking or not. Again, going back to what I shared earlier about having a look at the norms that are out there. And then if you're feeling that something is not quite right, referring to a speech pathologist or your medical health professional would be what I recommend.
This is another question from our followers. Is there anything I can do at home to help you with their speech? What games or activity are useful?
I love this question because the thing that I always get when I had my little one is, he can speak because you're a speech pathologist. But I actually do believe that every parent has it in them to be able to do these like strategies to help their children. So I'd say try to build it into your daily routine. But involve your children in your daily routine, speak to them about what you're doing, process things out loud. Oh, I'm going to the kitchen, I'm pouring some water into this cup, things that just seem really mundane to us, but to little ones, these things make a huge difference. And the more they hear it, the more they can understand. And then you need to hear something like many, many times before you can understand. And that understanding needs to come before the expressive speech is going to come. So the more input you are giving to these little ones, they're strengthening their neural pathways and their neural networks. And then you will see the speech start to come. So anything that's repetitive, anything that's fun, anything that gets them laughing and gets you, improving that connection between parent or caregiver and child. I think those are the things. Like, it can be simple games, doesn't have to be complex, can be as simple as flipping a cup upside down and they're loving it, but you're getting so much language from there. You're getting, I'm going to knock, 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 right? I'm going to lift up, lift down. So you're exploring concepts as well. You can talk about colors. You can talk about turning it around, spinning, all of these little things. And that's what a lot of therapy would cover as well. They would, look at a lot of simple concepts, but things that you can do again and again and again.
I think these are really good questions that our viewers and parents out there are asking. Questions about how to improve their speech as well. My next question, which is coming from one of our viewers as well, would be: I've heard that boys usually talk later than girls. Now, is that actually true?
It's very interesting as well. I think there are a lot of stats out there and they say, typical development, gender differences and things like that. But I always go back to, is that really the question that we should be asking? Like, why are we asking the question? Why are we comparing it that way? And I think I would go back to, what is the real concern here? And is it because we're seeing a delay in speech? So I think one of the things to consider is, are we spending the same amount of time, talking to our boys and our girls? Are we exposing them to the same type of language-rich environment, or are we having expectations about, what they should be doing? And I think, that's probably a better place to start rather than, looking at gender differences, because I think the strategies are going to be the same, and what you do for boys and girls are going to be the same as well. So just making sure that you have that language-rich environment and lots of repetition and building lots of good relationship.
The next question is: my child has been going to speech therapy, but I'm not seeing much progress. Is slow progress normal?
In terms of progress, I think it really depends on why the child was there in the first place. And there are lots of other factors to consider as well. Sometimes there are medical factors that we need to consider. I think if you feel that your child's not making the progress that you expect them to make, I think this is a really good conversation to have with your speech pathologist. You can don't be afraid to say, I'm not noticing, the progress as what I expect, and just have a conversation. See what the clinical assessment is from the speech pathologist. They might be able to explain to you a few things, or have some idea or knowledge about the factors that might be contributing to that. And there's always the option of referring on. There's always the option of getting a second opinion. I always think that, there is a certain element of being able to match and vibe with your therapist. And, if you don't feel that that is the right choice for you, always, feel free to, or rather don't feel bad to get a second opinion or to go elsewhere. I think that's totally fine, and parents need to know that that's okay.
Now, last but not least, the final question from another parent. How do I respond when people say every child develops at their own pace, but deep down I feel something isn't right? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I get quite often as well. And, you sometimes get people's opinions and people say, oh, no, my child developed at this rate. But if deep down you know that something's not quite right, I would recommend definitely to seek out either a speech pathologist opinion or a medical professional opinion as well. Sometimes they would be able to give you some insight into what's going on and maybe even give you strategies early on that can help you to close that gap earlier. Yeah, sometimes it's, something that you don't really have to worry about so much, but it always helps to get that professional help. So I would say trust your gut, get that professional help, have that discussion, and yeah, go from there.
Wonderful. Wow. All right. Well, I think that comes to the end of the episode with Melissa. That's amazing information that you shared with all of us and our viewers and parents out there. Thank you very much, Melissa, for coming on board for our second episode and sharing this very beneficial information that a lot of parents out there would love to hear more about it. Before we go, we've got something really small for you, a token of appreciation for thanking you to coming on board for our second episode. So I'm just gonna hand you a small little gift. There you go. I know it's not small and it's pretty heavy, but yes, there we go. So thank you very much for coming on board. And yeah, and that's the end of our second episode. Thank you very much for joining us in our second episode with Melissa, who just shared with us very beneficial information about speech therapy and how it helps with the child's development. We look forward to joining you guys in our third episode. Don't forget to subscribe and comment to all our social media handles. If you're not following us, please do follow us, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the third episode. Thank you.